Well, thanks for having me. Can we see the images okay? Because that's pretty key to this. And everybody can hear me in the back? Robert Spencer? Am I loud enough? All right. Louder. Okay. I'm David Thompson, and I'm an architect. And this is an image of the space before Trident Construction, who's represented here today, did an awful lot of work. And so I'd like to thank them for bending over backwards to get us in here. And another thank you to the Indigo Road Group managing the Cedar Room and making this available. There's a lot of effort to get us in, considering we're really not done. So thank you for that. So as an architect, I think the thing people most associate us with is design. It's certainly not all we do, although it may be the most interesting part. We're going to switch. Good? Good? Better? Excellent. Okay, so as a designer, I think it's important to remember we don't make anything. We set into course of action a plan that puts a team together that allows them to execute a vision or an idea. By default, I think that makes most of us in my profession fairly creative, some more than others. I'd like to see a show of hands of who in here considers that they work in a creative industry or profession. It's a big number, but not everybody. Those who didn't raise their hands, who thinks they approach their career creatively, even though it may not be a creative, quote-unquote, profession? Trey Redmond, you're wrong. You, in fact, are creative. Here's an interesting one that I found for creative, done in an unusual and often dishonest way. I'll leave it at that. Maybe true. I think this would be crafty. So the point of today is to talk about collaboration, or to collaborate, to work with another person or group in order to achieve or do something. It's flattering to me that I was chosen to speak about this because I frankly think I'm pretty poor at it. It's certainly not a natural action for me to share and play well with others, and I like my own sandbox, and that's just being honest. And it's been a learned skill to try to become better at collaboration. It's one that is ongoing every day. So the idea that our work is perceived as collaborative is wonderful. More often it feels like this: to give help to an enemy who has invaded your country during war. I did not make these definitions up. This was Merriam-Webster, true story. So how do you prevent this from happening? I considered today that the easy answer for this talk was to show you pretty pictures of cool stuff. I had a hard time making that work in 20 minutes. There's a lot of cool stuff and cool people we work with. So I think it'd be more interesting to talk about some of the difficulties I find in collaboration, especially in a creative field, and see if I can share some lessons learned with you guys and hopefully make you better collaborators than I am. If you can't read this t-shirt, this is my #1 problem. It says, "Let's assume I'm right and move on." I was given this t-shirt by my mother for Christmas last year. Not in this color, but that actual t-shirt, and my entire family found it pretty humorous, which tells me that it has a lot of truth to it. And I think people that have worked with me in this room and that work with me every day appreciate the difficulty of this, but I have a feeling I'm not alone. I think as a creative person, that comes hand in hand with passion. And that's not the worst thing in the world, but this is a pitfall we need to be careful of. Erykah Badu, in an introduction to one of her live performances, also hits the nail on the head that we're pretty sensitive about our work. I wouldn't consider myself an artist by any means. There's artists in this room, but what we do is certainly artistic in some ways. And I think as a result of that, with being creative, with being passionate, we can be really sensitive about things. We can take a little bit too much ownership of our ideas. So when you start to couple this with my t-shirt, it paints a picture of someone who's pretty difficult to get along with. So when I then tie that back into a designer doesn't make anything, how am I going to get anything built if I can't figure this out? I need other people. I need collaborators. So I turn to some of our clients as some of the best role models for collaborators. We do a lot of restaurant design. And this is generally an industry filled with very headstrong, opinionated, passionate, creative, wildly successful people. And a lot of what they do in this day and age depends on carving out a very unique individual identity for themselves. And yet they work with a team every single day. There's no chef putting out food by themselves. And I bet every single person on that line, the dishwashers included, the people in the front of the house, they've got opinions also, and yet they've figured out ways how to come together. Kevin Johnson and Mike Latta in Kevin Johnson's kitchen, putting out a set of dishes for a fundraising and event, and they're having a great time. And all egos are aside, and they've figured out a language that they can communicate with one another to move forward. Or a pop-up charity event. I mean, the amount of people that it takes for them to do what they do and not lose their creative vision or their artistry, I think this is a really good example of collaboration. I like to think of a successful collaboration as a conversation. We've all had conversations with people that are really bad conversationalists. They're either not interested, or when they're listening, they're not really listening. They're looking for that opportunity to make it be about themselves. They want to make it, yeah, this is my version of that story. And sometimes they just need to stop and listen. Other people don't really want to talk too much. They'd rather be your sounding board. They'd rather hear and advise. And I think if you look at that, what it really is about is a little bit of space. Can you give somebody a little bit of space to say what they have to say or do what it is that they do best? My chief collaborator is here, and in doing this, I realized how much she's taught me. She's very different than I am, and she gives me a lot of space to do my thing and to be wrong, or in my opinion, right, and figure it out. But this is often just a conversation of two people, and that's not what we have day to day in a working environment. So for what we do, it more than often takes at least 3 types of collaborators to get a project done. We've got designers, we've got the client, and we have the makers. Each one of these might have a whole multitude of people within that bubble. The first group I'm going to talk about is designers. And this could be, well, let's do this, charrette. This is a word everybody's using all the time, but it was traditionally reserved in architecture school as an intense planning session, always done in a group environment. And anybody who's sat through this, especially in school, it's intense. It goes back to that little bit of an enemy invading your territory kind of mentality if you're not careful. And you have to really kind of reframe that activity and not take it so personal and see how it can make your life or your design more rich. This is a pretty typical kind of pin-up that we would have to present to a client or to present to one another in our office. You can't see it real well, but there's a lot of red pen. And the red pen is someone drawing on your idea. And that's kind of scary sometimes, but it's incredibly healthy. I don't give everybody else a red pen often enough. We might start working on that. So when we're talking about working with other designers or other creatives, that kind of falls into 2 divisions. It could be your studio mates or your coworkers, and that's one kind of language. That's about figuring out, in my opinion, a hierarchy to the conversation, and where does everybody fit in? How are you going to give the space for someone to contribute? It's not a dictatorship. Sometimes that's just about getting a task done, but that's not about being creative. So to really be creative in a team environment, I think everybody's got to know a role. And if you're a team leader, and I haven't been in that position that long, founded my practice in 2010, so I'm very used to being on the other end of that, is you often are kind of working within a set of rules that aren't your rules, or working in a language that's not your language, but that doesn't mean there can't be room for your participation as well, and it's really important for me to figure out how to leave that room for participation. At the same time, somebody's got to set the vision. I think it's important to not confuse collaboration with compromise. Compromise is very different. Compromise is about not hurting someone's feelings, or it's about making a budget work or dealing with a timetable. Ultimately, it's about diluting an idea. And you have to do that, but that's not collaboration. It's okay to dig your heels in a little bit and fight for what's right, as long as you're willing to be wrong when you're wrong. We've got a really good team. All of these folks are here today, and I appreciate them being here. When you're dealing with other design fields that you have to collaborate with, and for us, this could be a kitchen designer, this could be a graphic design firm, this could be an identity firm. That's a really different thing, and I've had very successful endeavors. Candlefish, we did the design for them, working with that team, but working with Fuzzco, and really kind of taking a back seat to Fuzzco's vision, which was a new and important role for me to figure out how to do, was very successful. I've had other endeavors that I would almost qualify them as failures, and very often it was because of me. It was because we didn't have that line of communication to know who's going to do what. So to learn from that, what I've found is when I'm working with another agency, let's have a really transparent talk up front. This is what I care most about. This is what you care most about. Do we agree on the vision? Who's going to do what? Hash it out, because otherwise you get into that territory and things can get ugly. And don't be scared to just have that very blunt conversation up front. You're going to save a lot of frayed nerves later and figure out where the overlap's going to be. What's on the table for collaboration and what's not. The folks who make our projects, I think, are the most ingenious group of people that just naturally work together at all times. It's really, of the three groups, the one that I think I collaborate the best with. And for what we do, that ranges from a general contractor that oversees a project of this scale to someone who might be making a piece of furniture or a sign. Eric's in the audience, so that's exciting. And I have a very good rapport with these folks because I know I can't do what they do. In some ways, that makes it a lot easier for me to work with them and not get so territorial. It's a lot easier for me to give them a little bit of space. But it's important, you can't do it where everybody's working isolated. That's not collaboration either. So finding that sweet spot of what's the right amount of communication and what's the right amount of space to let people do their job. You know, I'm not going to tell someone how to build a custom light fixture. I don't know how to do it. But I'm going to give them feedback, and I'm going to set some parameters, and we're going to make sure we have a common design language, and we're going to figure out what the big picture is, and then I'm going to get out of their way. It's good to make friends during a project because ultimately in a small town like this, you're going to work with them again. And one of the important things, and this goes back to my chief collaborator, my wife, is that the more you work with someone, the easier the conversation is. You're going to figure each other out. And so forming those sort of languages with one another is critical. Giving somebody else the microphone sometimes is really a great thing. We did a walkthrough, and we had each one of the subcontractors and craftspeople explain what it was they were going to bring to the project before they even started making. This was for a media tour for Craftsman Kitchen and Tap House. So what you see in all of these photos is exactly what I hoped I would find when I went back through my kind of archives, is a bunch of people talking to one another. There's constant conversation, and that's real collaboration. You're in people's shops. I mean, how are you going to figure out how to reconstruct an alligator from South Carolina and get it to Las Vegas to hang it on a wall without a team? You're not going to. This is real stuff. We do this. It's weird and fun and difficult. When I was in architecture school, I had the benefit of hearing an architect named Will Bruder give a presentation. This was about 1996. And of all the beautiful buildings he showed, the thing that stuck with me the most was a conversation he had about clients and about working with your client. And roughly the quote was that architecture or design happens because of the client and not in spite of the client. And for headstrong, passionate, creative people, we really forget that a lot. And I think that that's one that's easy to translate to all different fields of work, is don't leave them out of the conversation. They're not there just to write the check and give you the canvas to do your artistry. It can be a much richer project if we figure out how to bring them into the conversation. So I've found that it builds a lot of trust, and that trust is key to a conversation. Ultimately, when you include your client in the design process a little bit more, you might find that on the second time they back out. You can buy yourself a little bit of creative wiggle room by falling on the sword once and actually listening to somebody's ideas, even though they're not architects, they're not designers, they're not makers, but ultimately they're the end user, it's theirs. Kind of like seeing everybody speaking to one another on the job sites. It was nice to me when I went back through photographs of our project files, how many photos I had of our clients sitting at our table with our pens and paper, and they're the ones drawing. I think that's really important. Here we are, Steve Palmer, client, Tom Lennon, contractor, David Thompson, architect. Happy, happy. You get the restaurant open, and that's a beautiful thing. So the conversations about how do you put, maybe it's 8 circles have to talk to one another, and how do you not leave someone in their own space to be left to their own devices and figure things out? That disconnect can be pretty dangerous. And at the same time, how do you figure out how to have a conversation without smothering them? That's not collaboration, that's a mess. And that can be that sort of war zone that's really uncomfortable for a creative person. So if you imagine these bubbles kind of wiggling back and forth in a dialogue and a conversation and a back and forth, a give and take, I think that's a much better model. And that really what you're looking for is this sort of sweet spot of overlap, of what's the right proportion of you do your thing, I'm going to do mine, and here's where we need to come together. And that is kind of it happens not once during a project, but it's constant. This is a detail from Brion Cemetery by Carlos Scarpa, and you can interpret this a number of different ways, and in fact I have since I first saw it. But what this shows me is the idea of two individuals overlapping, and what that creates is a third thing. So be that the creation of a child or a project or developing an idea, finding that middle ground, that third spot, that's really where design happens. So hopefully that's close to 20 minutes and engaging enough, because I'm ready for some questions. Thank you.